They thought she was useless, half wild, blind in both eyes, and barely worth the bullet. But when the slaughter truck crashed on a remote highway, and chaos exploded in every direction, she didn't run. She listened. And what happened next turned a discarded mare into an unlikely legend, because the horse who couldn't see somehow led 6 others through fire, fences, and fear itself to freedom. The dust never settled in the holding pens. It floated in the air like bad memory, gritty, choking, heavy with the scent of sweat and fear. Hooves shuffled constantly, striking cracked earth in uneven rhythms. Some horses kicked, some screamed, most just stood, resigned, ribs showing, ears flicking toward every unfamiliar sound like it might be the end. In the farthest pen, where the shade barely touched, stood a mare unlike the others. She didn't pace, didn't fight, didn't seem to see the rusted gates or the men who leaned on them with cigarettes and clipboards. Her coat had once been a pale gold, but now it was caked with dust and dried blood where another horse had kicked too close. Her eyes were clouded over, milk white, unfocused, a film over each, like frost on a window no one had bothered to scrape clean. She wasn't tethered, didn't need to be. Leave that one, a worker muttered as they passed. Spook's no good, blind as a bat. But she wasn't spooked, just still. Every so often her ears rotated, one toward a distant bang, one toward the low sob of a mare separated from her foal. Her nostrils twitched at each new scent, diesel fuel, old hay, fear. She moved only when necessary, conserving energy like she knew something the others didn't. Her tail hung limp. Her legs were nicked and cracked from too many fences and too little rest. A young gelding beside her panicked when a tractor backfired and slammed into her side. She didn't flinch, just turned her head slightly, breathing him in, brushing his flank with her muzzle once before returning to stillness. No one noticed that moment. Not the man loading paperwork in the office. Not the driver stretching beside the slaughter truck. Not the handler adjusting a metal prod by the chute. But the gelding noticed, and for the first time in days he stopped shaking. The blind mare's presence didn't command. It calmed. The others didn't have names, just numbers, spray-painted across their rumps in neon green. She had none. No brand, no tag, just clouded eyes, quiet strength, and a body built by survival. When the sun began to dip behind the distant ridges, and long shadows stretched like fingers through the pens, a new sound rolled in from the highway, a low rumble, tires grinding gravel. The truck was early. Horses shifted in response, hooves clanging against rusted gates. Panic rose like heat, but in the farthest pen she simply lifted her head and moved, 1 step, then 2, toward the sound that terrified the others, not because she trusted it, but because she needed to know where it was going. The sky hadn't even broken open yet, just a faint silver line behind the hills, not quite dawn, not quite night, but the yard lights snapped on like judgment, and the sound came fast, boots on gravel, metal gates clanging open, sharp curses cutting through the cold. The horses surged in confusion, nostrils flaring, eyes wild with the scent of diesel and the slap of leather straps. They knew. Reverie didn't move, not at first. Others pressed against her, jostling in frantic waves. A roan gelding tried to leap the gate and failed, crashing sideways into the mud. A paint mare reared, catching her hoof on another's neck, and through it all Reverie stood like stone, ears flicking, nostrils testing the air, reading the room in vibrations and breath. The truck hissed as it braked, an old red semi with a battered steel trailer, streaked with rust and blood. The ramp was lowered, slamming into the ground with a finality that silenced even the most panicked screams. They began the sorting fast. A man with a branding stick shouted numbers. Another drove them toward the chute with a pipe, banging it against the fence rails like a drumbeat of doom. The horses went in bunches, hooves skidding, some slipping, some fighting, all doomed. When they reached her pen, the youngest worker hesitated. "That one's blind," he said, gesturing to Reverie. The supervisor didn't glance up. "So's a side of beef. Doesn't matter. Load her." They tried to herd her with whistles, claps, smacks of the pipe against metal. Reverie didn't budge. She tilted her head slightly, registering the echoes. Not fear, not defiance, calculation. It took the prod. A crackle of electricity against her flank sent her leaping sideways, stumbling. She caught herself. Her ears shot back, teeth bared, but she didn't lash out, just moved forward, reluctant, careful, every hoofstep measured, balanced. She passed the chute wall by inches, never brushing it, even without sight. Inside the truck, it was worse, hot, loud. The walls vibrated with every panic shift. Horses slammed against the sides, rearing, kicking, screaming. Reverie stood near the center, head lowered. She couldn't see the walls, but she felt them through her hooves, through the air, through the chaos bouncing around her like thunder trapped in a box. She didn't scream, didn't bolt. Her ears turned constantly, left, right, behind, mapping, listening. Outside, the door slammed shut, darkness. But Reverie had lived in darkness all her life. She took one breath, then another, and waited. The storm didn't roar in. It crept, first as a whisper in the trees, then a steady hum on the roof of the cab. The driver rubbed sleep from his eyes and squinted through the cracked windshield, wipers smearing more than clearing. The road curled tight around the mountainside, slick with fresh rain, no guardrails, just drop. The radio crackled warnings, but he tuned them out. One more delivery, one more check, then done. Behind him the trailer groaned with the restless weight of 12 living creatures, hooves shifting, bodies swaying with every curve. He'd hauled livestock for 20 years. This was nothing new, just animals. He didn't know one of them was blind, or listening, or about to make history. Lightning cracked the sky in two, and then the sound, a low rumble, wrong in its timing, not thunder, not wind, something deeper, earthborn. The rock slide broke loose above the truck, like the mountain exhaling its rage. Boulder after boulder crashed down, ripping trees from their roots. One massive stone hit the hood square on. The driver screamed. The wheel jerked left, tires skidded, the trailer fishtailed, metal screamed against metal. Then the road disappeared. The semi jackknifed, flipping sideways in midair, snapping the hitch like a matchstick. The trailer spun, an iron coffin with hooves inside, then slammed into the ravine wall and tore open like a can, flinging horses into the blackness. Reverie didn't scream. She couldn't see the trees whipping past or the ground rising to meet her, only felt gravity rip her forward, then weightlessness, then impact. Something sharp slashed across her shoulder. Her body rolled. She hit again, then stillness. Rain poured in sheets. The wreckage steamed and hissed. Metal groaned as it settled. And somewhere in the dark, amid bent steel and broken boards, a white-eyed mare pushed herself to her feet. The storm raged on. The rain hit like nails now, cold, hard, unrelenting. Steam rose from the twisted wreck, mingling with the stench of diesel and blood. The trailer lay on its side, split wide open, its walls folded back like broken wings. Sharp metal jutted at odd angles. Debris littered the slope, planks, glass, ropes, bodies. And in the center of it all she rose, Reverie, legs trembling, breath ragged, coat smeared with mud and something darker. Her ribs heaved, her flank bled, but she stood. Around her, chaos. A chestnut gelding scrambled up the slope, slipping in the wet earth, eyes rolling white. A gray mare screamed as she fought against a tangled halter that had caught on the bent trailer frame. Another horse lay motionless, half covered in tarp, flank rising only slightly, alive but barely. Reverie didn't flee. She turned her ears, one after the other, filtering the noise, panic, wind, water, pain. Then she moved, not fast, not straight, but with purpose. Her hooves picked their way through twisted metal, her body navigating by memory and sound, not sight. She paused once beside the gray mare, scented her breath, then gently touched noses. The mare calmed, just enough. Reverie nudged her, then moved on. To the next cry, she found a young filly trapped beneath a fractured beam. Reverie lowered her head, breathing her in, ears flicking. The filly's breathing was shallow, legs pinned, eyes wide. Reverie pressed her shoulder against the wood. Nothing budged, but still she stayed, standing over the filly like a silent sentinel as the wind howled around them. No one told her to lead. No instinct screamed go. Every wild urge said run, run, run to find distance, escape, safety. But Reverie didn't run. She listened to the sounds that mattered, to life, and wherever those sounds called her, she followed. The rain had softened into mist by the time Reverie returned to the wreckage, not because the storm was over, but because it had spent most of its fury. Now came the hush that follows disaster, the kind that felt too quiet, too slow, like the land was holding its breath. She moved carefully through the broken remains of the trailer, hooves crunching over twisted scraps of metal and wet splinters of wood. Her blind eyes saw none of it, but she felt everything, each shift of weight, each groan from a horse still alive, each ragged breath carried in the fog. A low whimper caught her ear. She turned slowly, ears triangulating. Beneath a warped crossbeam, a mare lay on her side, legs folded awkwardly, one shoulder pinned beneath the debris. Her coat, dappled gray, was slick with rain and blood. She twitched once. Reverie stepped closer, nose to flank. She stood there for a moment, unmoving, just breathing, matching the other's rhythm until the trembling slowed. Then she backed away, not because she was done, but because there were more. She turned again and walked on. The next came with a grunt, muffled under a torn tarp tangled in barbed wire. A bay gelding, sides heaving, eyes wide with confusion. He didn't rise when she approached, only rolled his head toward her and wheezed. Reverie circled him slowly, twice, her shoulder brushing his withers, her breath warm on his neck. Then she pressed her nose to the space behind his ear. Something ancient passed between them, not language but permission. When she stepped back, he struggled upright, legs wobbling, head low but standing. She moved again, a younger mare, limping and wild-eyed, a senior stallion, ribs showing, confused by the mud. Reverie didn't rush, didn't panic. She made a circle around each one, nose to shoulder, flank to side, always the same, a rhythm, a ritual, her own version of counting. By the time the mist cleared, 6 horses had gathered loosely in her wake, not tethered, not driven, just following. Not one of them knew why, only that when she brushed past, something in them settled, and in that stillness, they moved forward, together. The forest loomed like a wall, slick bark, dripping leaves, ground churned soft by the storm. The slope rose steep ahead, rocks jutting out like broken teeth. No trail, no markings, just trees, endless, wet, unfamiliar trees. But Reverie turned toward them anyway. The others hesitated. The gray mare limped in place. The bay gelding tossed his head, nostrils flared. Behind them, the wreck still smoked, and the road, the only road, was gone beneath a slide of boulders and blackened mud. Whatever path they had come from no longer existed. Reverie took another step, then another, and then, without a word, because they had none, the others followed. She didn't know where they were going, not with sight, but something else tugged at her, a sound she'd caught earlier, long before the crash. Not the mechanical hiss of the truck, or the angry voices of men, but something older, something cleaner, the soft hush of moving water. She remembered it. When the trailer had slowed for a turn, the rain had paused just long enough for her ears to catch it, faint, steady, flowing. A stream, maybe, or a creek fed by snowmelt, not poisoned like the troughs at the feedlot, not violent like the storm runoff, but real water, the kind that heals. Now she angled her body toward that memory. Every step was deliberate. The slope grew slick beneath her hooves, branches whipped against flanks, the underbrush clawed at legs already scraped raw, but she never faltered. She led with her ears, with her nose, with instinct. The others spread out behind her, unsure. A chestnut gelding stumbled, the older stallion snorted in frustration, but none turned back. Reverie's quiet movement pulled them like a tide. At one point she stopped, head lifted, ears rotating slowly, and then she turned slightly left. The gelding paused, confused, but when she stepped forward again he did too, then the rest. The forest grew darker, but not colder. They passed a cedar snapped by lightning, a deer carcass, a broken fence post. Still she pressed on, and then there it was. The sound returned, faint but clearer now, trickling, steady, just over the next rise. Reverie lifted her head and quickened her pace. Behind her, 6 horses she'd never met walked together in silence, placing their faith in a mare who couldn't see, not because they understood her, but because something in her stillness felt like knowing. The forest thinned just enough for light to trickle through, soft gray shafts slicing between tree trunks and settling on the wet earth like breath. The sound of water was stronger now, closer. The air smelled cleaner, lighter. Hope hovered on the edges. Then they saw it. A fence. Old, rusted, half collapsed in places, but still a barrier. Barbed wire stretched between leaning posts, sagging like tired arms. It cut a ragged line across the clearing, separating forest from pasture. Or maybe something worse. The others froze. The chestnut gelding pawed the ground nervously. The younger mare nickered low, confused. The gray mare limped to a halt, flanks heaving. Reverie didn't stop. She walked straight toward it. The wire glinted in places where rain had washed away the rust. Sharp, taut in some places, loose in others. The kind of fence that meant pain if you tested it wrong. The others watched with held breath, waiting for her to recoil, to bleed. She didn't. She approached until her shoulder brushed the wire. It buzzed slightly, a tremor against her skin. Her ears rotated, head tilted. She didn't flinch, didn't back up, just stood there, listening. Then a shift, one hoof forward, a small pivot to the left, and the wire didn't touch her anymore. She moved again, one step, then another. Her chest passed through something invisible, air where tension should have been. The break in the line, an opening. She found it not by sight, but by feel. She disappeared into the grass beyond. The others stood still for a heartbeat too long. Then the old stallion snorted and followed. He pressed toward the spot she vanished into, nose low, steps hesitant. He paused at the wire, then mimicked her pivot, and passed through untouched. The gray mare was next, then the young gelding. One by one they watched where she had walked, mirrored her movements, and crossed, not because they understood, but because her path felt safe. Reverie waited just beyond the fence, head lifted, ears turning gently as each hoofstep passed through. No panic, no prod, just the quiet logic of a mare who knew how to listen. Behind them the forest whispered. Ahead the stream called. And for the first time since the world turned upside down, the horses had crossed a line, not into captivity, but toward something that felt like beginning. The forest fell quiet after dusk, in that eerie way that feels more like warning than peace. The wind died, the stream nearby gurgled softly, but even that seemed hushed. The 6 horses huddled in a hollow just beyond the fence line, pressed close under the low-hanging branches of a pine thicket. Steam rose from their backs, mixing with the early cold. Reverie stood apart, not far, but forward, upright, alert. Her ears never stopped turning. Something had shifted in the air. The others dozed lightly, twitching with every snap of twig, every gust of breeze. But Reverie stayed still, her body rigid, muscles coiled just beneath the mud-crusted hide. Then it came, not loud, not fast, just there, a presence, a shape in the dark moving without sound. The gelding lifted his head first, then the gray mare stirred and blew sharply through her nostrils. Panic spread in small waves, wide eyes, shifting hooves, a half-reared flinch. Reverie didn't move. She felt it before they saw it. A low growl rolled across the clearing like a storm, still deciding if it wants to break. The mountain lion stepped into the moonlight, lean, amber-eyed, tail low, muscles smooth as silk beneath the fur. It was hungry, confident, and it had chosen its moment. The younger mare let out a shrill cry and bolted 2 strides before slamming to a stop. Fence behind, forest ahead, trapped. The lion crouched, the others froze. Reverie planted, her ears snapped forward, her chin lifted. She didn't rear, not yet. She waited. When the cat moved, quick, silent, a blur of power and intent, then she rose, high, hooves slicing air. A sound tore from her throat, not a scream of fear but of fury, a voice built from dust and thunder and every moment of blindness that had never broken her. The lion faltered mid-charge. Reverie came down hard, striking the ground like a warning shot. Then she advanced, 3 steps forward, head snaked low, ears pinned flat. The others had never seen her move like that. None of them had. She couldn't see the predator, but she knew where it was. The mountain lion hissed, but it backed away, tail twitching, weight shifting, eyes never leaving her face. A pause, then a growl, then it turned, slipped into shadow, gone. Silence returned, heavier than before. The others stood trembling. Reverie turned her head, ears sweeping back toward them. No words, just presence. She walked to the center of the group, stood tall, and stayed that way until morning, not because she could see, but because she refused not to be seen. The dawn broke quietly. No fanfare, no birdsong, just a soft gold light bleeding through the mist, turning the wet world silver for a moment. The air smelled of ash and rain, and something older, something buried. Reverie moved first. She stepped from the thicket without hesitation, ears tuned, hooves pressing carefully into the softened earth. The others rose slowly, stiff and silent, their bodies marked with scrapes and exhaustion. They didn't know where they were going, but she did. Ahead, the land dipped into a shallow cut, dry, narrow, carved long ago by water that no longer ran. An old riverbed, forgotten, half covered in moss and thyme. She entered it without pause. The others followed, single file. The ground beneath them changed, cooler, packed with stones, smoothed by centuries, flanked by willows that bent low over the path. Every curve offered shelter, every bend a veil. The world above might have been watching, but here, they disappeared. Miles away, men in orange vests searched the wreckage site, shouting into radios and pointing at topographic maps. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Rescue trucks rumbled along paved roads with trailers half full and blind spots big enough to swallow entire bands of horses. They were looking in the wrong direction. Technology couldn't see what Reverie felt. The path wound on, deeper into the hills. At times the canyon walls narrowed, pressing close enough that the horses walked in single file, their sides brushing the stone. Reverie led without doubt. She turned before obstacles appeared. She paused just long enough for hooves behind her to adjust. The others no longer questioned her. When a fallen tree blocked the way, she sniffed its edge, then stepped to the left, finding a slope that carried them safely around. When birds scattered violently from a thicket above, she stopped, ears forward, body frozen, until the danger passed unseen. Hours slipped by like leaves in the stream that once lived here, and still they moved. No signs, no hoofprints but theirs, just the quiet hush of a trail not taken in decades. By midday, the canyon opened slightly, sagebrush dotted the edges. The stream's ghost whispered faintly beneath them, dry now but still remembered by the land. Reverie paused, ears turning, head lifting to the wind. Then she walked on, not following instinct, but leading it. Micah sat on the fence like he always did, boots swinging, elbows on knees, hoodie pulled tight against the morning chill. The world was still, wrapped in mist that clung to the pasture like breath that wouldn't quite exhale. Behind him, the rescue ranch stirred slow, someone feeding goats, the hum of an early truck. But out here, At the tree line, nothing moved except his thoughts. He'd come every morning since the wreck, since the news showed images of twisted metal and red-painted numbers blurred behind smoke and rain, since they'd said not all the horses had been found. He didn't know why he couldn't let it go. He just knew they were still out there. The mist began to lift, soft and slow, like a curtain reluctant to rise. He squinted, leaning forward, heartbeat drumming in his throat for no reason he could name. Then he heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just the faint crunch of hooves on dry riverstone. He froze. Out of the fog came shapes, blurred, slow-moving, unreal. 7. No ropes, no humans, just horses. The first was tall, mud-caked. Her head was high, her body lean, her steps unhurried. Micah narrowed his eyes and felt a strange pull in his chest. She was leading them. One by one they emerged behind her, limping, bruised, thin, but upright, moving like they had somewhere to be, like they'd chosen to come. Micah slid off the fence and walked to the gate, heart hammering now. The lead mare stopped just short of the wire. She didn't shy, didn't call out, just stood still, ears forward. Micah didn't speak, didn't want to break whatever spell had carried them this far. Then, as if on cue, she took 2 more steps, closer. He saw her eyes, clouded, empty, blind, and somehow more aware than any sighted horse he'd ever met. His breath caught in his throat. "You brought them," he whispered. No halter, no brand, no human hand had guided her. But here they were, alive, together, led not by sight, but by something else. Micah stepped back and unlatched the gate. No urgency, no fear, just invitation. And as the mare crossed into safety with 6 horses behind her, the fog lifted for good. The boy who waited had finally been found. Boots hit the gravel fast. Voices shouted from across the yard. A truck door slammed. Then the sound of gates unlocking, feed buckets clattering, and the high, urgent call of someone yelling, "Get the vet now." The horses had barely stepped into the corral when the team descended. Not rough, not harsh, just quick, efficient. Blankets thrown over shivering backs, syringes prepped, water hauled, names not yet assigned but injuries already being catalogued. A gray mare with a swollen knee, a gelding with a long gash across his shoulder, a younger filly coughing from smoke exposure. One by one they were guided into makeshift stalls, gently examined, recorded. But the mare who led them, she didn't move. She stood just inside the fence, chest rising and falling with slow, even breath, legs coated in dried mud and cuts that had crusted black. Her head lifted as the people approached, but she didn't flinch, didn't shy from the hands, just stood. The lead vet, a woman with graying hair and quiet hands, stepped close. She reached out, fingers gentle beneath the mare's chin, lifting slightly to study the eyes. "Oh," she breathed. Micah stood behind her, arms crossed tight over his chest. "She's blind," the vet said softly, turning to her team. Someone behind her scoffed. Then how'd she get them here? No one answered. Not yet. Micah did. He stepped forward, resting a hand against the mare's cheek. Her skin twitched slightly under his palm, but she didn't pull away. "She knew where she was going," he said, voice steady, "even if nobody else did." The vet looked at him, and for a long second, no one spoke. Then someone added hay to the bin. Someone else filled a trough, and Reverie lowered her head, just slightly toward the boy, letting him stay. As the other horses settled into stalls, fed and cleaned, their eyes never left her. Every movement she made sent ripples through them, shifts in posture, ears turning to her steps. She wasn't just one of them, she was the reason they were. A mare with no name, no sight, but somehow more direction than any map could offer. The vet jotted notes on a clipboard, but Micah didn't watch her. He stood with the mare, and when she exhaled slow and deep, like the end of a long road, he stayed quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes the greatest answers come from simply standing beside the ones who never asked for praise, only a place to rest. The barn quieted as evening settled in. The storm-gray sky outside faded to blue, then charcoal. Inside, the only sounds were the steady rustle of hay, the soft clink of a halter ring brushing metal, and the occasional exhale of a horse finally learning how to breathe without fear. They were safe now, but safety didn't erase the past. The vet moved from stall to stall, recording more than just injuries, reading the stories carved into bodies. A mare with a BLM freeze brand under a layer of dried blood, numbers scorched into her neck, remnants of a roundup years ago. Her hind leg bore an old break poorly healed, the kind of injury that ends a wild life or traps it. Next, the chestnut gelding with rope burns high on his pasterns, teeth filed down to nubs. He flinched every time a gate creaked open. They guessed illegal racing, backroads. No rules, just money and pain. Another, a skewbald filly, barely 2 years old, showed signs of long confinement. Her mane thinned where it had rubbed against something tight for too long. She watched the world like it might vanish if she blinked, and yet none of them came alone. They came behind her, Reverie stood at the end of the barn, in the corner stall with no door. She didn't need one, she wasn't going anywhere. Micah sat outside her space, cross-legged, scribbling in a spiral notebook. Not facts, not charts, just thoughts. "I think you picked them," he said quietly, not looking up. Not by accident, not by who was closest, but who needed out the most. Reverie shifted slightly, her blind eyes turned toward his voice, ears soft, listening. The others had begun to mirror her rhythm. When she moved, they watched. When she stood still, they rested. Even the dominant gelding, once frantic in panic, followed her like a yearling now. They had followed her through broken fences, predators' eyes, and the silence of places maps don't bother naming, and somehow they knew she had seen them, not with sight, but with something deeper, the kind of knowing only born from living through what others ran from. Micah looked around at the stalls, at horses that should have been statistics, scattered across holding pens, and kill pens, and forgotten lots. Instead, they were here, together, brought by a blind mare with no name, not because they were the strongest, but because somewhere in the wreckage, she recognized herself in their scars. They left the gate unlatched, not by mistake, but by choice. A quiet decision whispered between Micah and the ranch manager, spoken without drama. No fences, no final commands, just space. One morning, the skewbald filly slipped out first, ears high, steps light. Her body healed enough to remember it belonged to open places. A week later, the chestnut gelding followed, after sniffing the wind for an hour straight, as if confirming something before walking away without looking back. By the end of the month, only 2 remained from the original 7, and then just her, Reverie. No halter, no tether, no scar thick enough to stop her. But still, she stayed, not stalled, not fenced. She had the same open gate as the others. Past the low rise, beyond the scrub grass and wind-worn ridges, lay the public lands where Mustangs still ran. Wild, free, forgotten. Reverie had led them all to safety, but she didn't take it for herself. She chose something else. She stayed close to the barn but never inside, preferred the edge of the property between trees and pasture, where she could feel the wind shift before it came, where her ears picked up Micah's voice before his boots hit the ground. Every morning he walked out to her. No rope, no lead, just his presence. She would turn her head as he approached, slow, calm, expectant. Sometimes he'd sit beside her, sometimes not. Sometimes he'd talk, telling her things most people didn't know about him. About loss, about not fitting in, about the kind of silence that doesn't go away when the room empties. She understood, not with words, but with the quiet way she lowered her head when he spoke, as if anchoring him to something solid, something that didn't judge. "She could leave whenever she wants," the ranch manager said one afternoon, watching from a distance. Micah nodded, brushing dirt from his jeans. "That's why she doesn't." They didn't call her broken anymore, didn't pity her blindness, because Reverie didn't move like a horse that lacked something. She moved like a horse that knew something, that knew the value of stillness, of choosing to stay, not because she couldn't go, but because for the first time she didn't have to run. There were no reins, no bit, no commands barked from across the arena, just Micah's voice, low, steady, a rhythm she'd come to recognize before the wind even shifted. He never asked for much, a step, a pause, a turn toward sound instead of sight, and she gave it, not because she was trained, because she chose to listen. They worked in the paddock at dusk when the shadows were soft and the world quieted. Micah would hum sometimes, not a song, just a sound to follow. Reverie responded like she always had, with her ears, her breath, the tilt of her body reading things no human could teach. Eventually others came, not riders, survivors, a girl who hadn't spoken since the fire, a veteran with hands that shook too hard to hold a lead rope, a boy who flinched at loud voices but stood still when Reverie walked by. They didn't ask her to perform, they just stood near her, and that was enough, because Reverie didn't push, she didn't judge, she didn't see scars on skin or otherwise, she felt them, and she stayed. One afternoon, a visitor asked Micah the question people always seem to circle toward: how did she lead them out? 6 horses. Through floodwaters, fences, and predators, blind. Micah didn't answer right away. He rested a hand on Reverie's neck, just behind her ear, where her coat had grown soft again. She never saw what was in front of her, he said, but she always knew what mattered. The visitor tilted her head, confused. Micah smiled. Not big, just enough. Sometimes, he said, the ones who can't see are the ones who guide. Reverie shifted her weight slightly, ears turning toward his voice, as if to say, "I'm here, I heard that." By then, most of the others she'd rescued had found new places, open ranges, sanctuary lands, homes with space to roam. But she remained, not captive, not contained, present. She taught the staff more than the therapist did, about patience, about stillness, about how some wounds aren't visible, but walk beside us like shadows. And when the barn was quiet, when the world outside buzzed too loud to carry, Micah would sit beside her, notebook in his lap, pen quiet. He didn't write instructions, he wrote gratitude, because the mayor who couldn't see the world taught everyone how to move through it. Eyes closed, heart open, unafraid. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share Revery's journey with someone who needs to believe in second chances, unseen strength, and the quiet power of simply staying. Leave a comment with what part hit you hardest. Subscribe for more true and inspired stories that remind us, sometimes the ones who can't see are the ones who guide.